There can be many positives to a sequel, like improved gameplay or a higher quality story. But when it comes to sequels, there is usually a common issue, a problem we've all experienced. Let's say you play the sequel to a game. It's fantastic. You finish it, and you know that it's better than the first game in almost every way. There's no denying it. The sequel is better. But there's a problem many sequels cannot overcome. You cannot help but like the first game more. Of course, this is not a hard and fast rule for everyone, but it seems to be a common problem with sequels, particularly sequels to very good games. So, why is this the case? Why is God of War Ragnarok as good or better in every facet than God of War 2018, yet people look more fondly on that first game? Why is Doom 2016 considered many people's favorite, even though Eternal turned everything up to 11 and refined much of the gameplay? The answer is quite simple. It comes down to newness. For many gamers, that original entry gives a feeling of freshness and novelty. So often those first games can be so good because they are providing new experiences, whether it be a fresh take on characters, a new story, new gameplay, etc. So, when the sequel to that game refines, enhances, and expands what the first game did, it technically provides a better experience and game, but that feeling of newness is all but gone or heavily diminished. And again, the better the first game is, the harder it is for the sequel to escape this problem. Because if the first games are considered masterpieces, how do you elevate the sequel? Most of the time, developers choose to go with this method of refinement for the sequels. This ensures the sequel is going to be reviewed very well and enjoyed by many, but it also means few may walk away liking the sequel more. Now, as a brief note, is this really the worst problem in the world? Of course not. In fact, many gamers simply want exactly this, more of a good thing. Still, it's an interesting phenomenon that occurs, and there's more to discuss. So, moving on, if this is a problem for many sequels, how do some developers solve this issue of newness in their second or follow-up game? Well, they can do a few things. One way is to offer very different game designs. For example, if the first game was largely linear, switching to an open world in the sequel will provide a fresh experience for the gamer. Not to mention offering more places to visit and see gives the feeling that the sequel is that much more different than the first. Second, some sequels offer a completely different story, gameplay, and/or characters. By treating these next entries as more of anthologies versus direct sequels, it allows the gamer to have a very different and new experience. Then there are special cases, specifically when the next entry is a generational upgrade over the previous game. Red Dead Redemption 2, Mass Effect 2, Resident Evil 4, and other games come to mind. All these games came out in a subsequent console generation than their previous entries, allowing these sequels to showcase a huge graphical leap. But it's not just graphics. These games offer refined gameplay that has been expertly expanded upon, as well as having many new additions and features added, culminating in an experience so superior and better that it makes the previous game look like a rough first draft, even if it was considered a masterpiece at the time it released. Sequels like these are not common, so when they release, they often go down in history as some of the best games ever made. But at the same time, developers need to be careful with how a sequel feels and how different it may be. In the pursuit of trying to one-up their first game, there is a risk that developers may take things too far. A sequel needs to delicately balance the new with the old. If you end up making a sequel so dissimilar than the first, you risk alienating the gaming audience. It is not good if a sequel does not feel like it should be in the same series as the previous or first game, nor is it good if those changes in the sequel simply make a far worse game. In other words, it's a very difficult balance to get right. Why risk losing fans or money by potentially making a worse game when gamers already loved what you did in that first entry? Ultimately, it makes a lot of sense why developers would not want to take many risks with their sequel. So, is this sequel problem really one that needs solving? Usually not, but stay tuned for some exceptions. As I mentioned earlier, the problem is not that bad, and many gamers love that the sequel is very similar to the first game, so it's a win-win for both developers and gamers. If they really like Spider-Man and want more, then that's great, because they get to play Miles Morales in Spider-Man 2. A familiar sequel may not be as revered as the first game, but at a minimum it is guaranteed to provide a really good experience for gamers. And of course, in the current games industry, buying a game you know you're going to enjoy is invaluable. However, I will offer one word of caution. Though this is a problem that generally does not need solving, there are exceptions. Franchises like Call of Duty or Assassin's Creed have repeatedly iterated on their sequels for many years. Let's use Assassin's Creed as an example. For me and many others, there's no beating the golden age of the Ezio trilogy or Black Flag, games that came out over a decade ago. Story aside, the newer games may be technically better, yet the franchise has gotten stale because the sequels only iterate on the previous games. So, there does come a point where the developers need to take heavy risks and make sequels that are meaningfully different, because eventually, those great but similar sequels won't satisfy gamers anymore. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.